Here now, billionaire investor Wilbur Ross, chairman and CEO of W.L. Ross and Company, joining us. Wilbur, you're an investor in companies, right? You've got your own business, but you're not a public company. What do you make of the campaign trail attacks on business and individual corporations specifically?
Well, I think there's a terrible populist sentiment that's brewing, and it's manifesting itself being anti-business. But think about it. If you like employment, how can you hate employers? If you like tax revenues, how can you make life more difficult for the major taxpayers? So there's an illogic to the populism. And I think what is happening is middle-class America and slightly below middle class have been left behind for a decade. They're angry, they're fed up with it, and that's why you're seeing the political phenomenon that we have. But it's not addressing the underlying issue, which is how do you make America more competitive?
Wilbur, I don't know if you read Jeff Immelt's piece in the Washington Post. I mean, excuse my saucy language on a family show, but he appears to be justifiably pissed off about Senator Bernie Sanders saying that GE is a problem with the moral fabric of America. And then he goes on to say, actually, that the senator has never stopped by our aviation plant in Rutland, Vermont, where they employ more than 1,000 people. GE is one of the biggest employers in Vermont. Senator Sanders has been in Congress for Vermont since 1990, and yet he has never seen this institution or this business at work there employing people. Do you find that as astounding as I do?
Well, if it weren't Bernie Sanders, I would find it astounding. My understanding is that until he was 40 years of age and was elected mayor of the town in Vermont, he had never had a full-time paying job. And I think that tells you a lot about how little he comprehends about how the real economy works.
Let's bring in now Bill George as well. He is joining us, former Medtronic CEO, currently a CNBC contributor, not only a former CEO, currently on the boards of some big and well-known companies. Bill, when you see an attack like this, or the ones that we have seen, what's the conversation in the boardroom? Do you respond? Do you agree with what Immelt and Reid have done?
Well, I feel differently about Immelt and Reid. I think Immelt was 100% correct in defending GE. GE is a great company, done great things, and Jeff is really getting the company exactly where he's wanted it the last 5 years after getting out from under Jack's shadow. And I think he's doing the right things and investing in technology, investing in the future, investing in the future of America. This is a great company that's doing all the right things. I feel differently about Ian Reid. I do think we have a fundamental problem with our tax system, our corporate taxes. It's got to be corrected, and just cutting the inversions is not going to deal with the root cause problem. But you can't run a business primarily for tax, and I see those as very different situations. And frankly, there's criticism left and right. I mean, the politicians on the right side are very critical of corporations too. So this is a tough time for corporations to navigate through the public.
Is it okay that they changed the rules of the road in the middle of the game? That this,
yeah, I think that's really unfair. That's a very unfair thing to do. It's one thing to make a new rule prospectively, but to do it in effect retroactively, I think goes against the whole concept of proper jurisprudence.
Mr. George, Bill George?
I agree with you, Wilbur, on that. I think it's wrong to change them retroactively. And I think that, unfortunately, the Pfizer-Allergan deal was set up almost entirely on tax, and it wasn't based on strategy like some other inversions have been done, which have gone ahead. My former company announced no material impact because they're going ahead. I agree with you entirely, though. I don't think we should change the rules retroactively. Business people need to have some certainty and to know what the picture and what the outlook is. And I can tell you, unless they deal with the root cause of this tax problem, we're going to have corporate tax problem. We're going to have a lot more problems coming up because people will find other ways. Frankly, one of the issues that no one's addressing is that an American company is worth more to a European company than it is to American shareholders today because of taxes. And that's not a good thing. And so we got to get to the root cause of the problem. And frankly, I would advocate a territorial tax. So we tax people where the revenues are generated. And that would clear up a lot of these problems, because we can't have companies forced to keep their cash offshore because of the dual tax system.
There seems to be an unwillingness to address the root cause of this problem here. But Wilbur, I want to get back to the sort of the campaign rhetoric that seems to be dominating, and that is an anti-business, equating business interests with being un-American, immoral. This seems to be across the campaigns. And as I understand it, Wilbur, you're backing Donald Trump, and he's one who made a big deal about saying, about Apple, for instance, that all those jobs that exist in China should be brought back here to the United States. What would you say to your candidate in terms of talking about business?
Well, two things. First of all, I didn't say I'm backing Donald Trump.
Okay.
What I said is that if Donald Trump were the Republican nominee, I would support him. I believe in the two-party system, and to me that means whoever, if you're part of a party and an active part, whoever is the nominee, you need to support. Otherwise, you get a balkanized political system like they have in so many countries in Europe, and you have all these little splinter parties. So that's the first thing. But second, I think it's utterly ridiculous to call business inherently immoral. I think it's more immoral to be as loose with the facts as some of the campaign rhetoric has been. The idea that all corporations are evil and everybody who's anti-corporation is well-intentioned is not only not true, it's just a ridiculous assertion. And I think all it bespeaks is the ignorance of the person saying it.
You know, it's sort of a different topic, Wilbur. When you look at sort of business and employment history of political candidates, it's not just Bernie Sanders on the left. There are candidates on the right, and there are currently employed congressmen on the right who have effectively been in office for 30 or 40 years and may have not actually been in the private sector workforce for a generation or more. Do you think there should be some sort? I mean, you can't even get into a good business school unless you've really had at least a couple years in business. Do you think there should be some sort of requirement for private sector employment in terms of high-level national office? I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah, I'll tell you what the question reminds me of. Remember Bill Buckley's characterization of Jack Kennedy's economic team. He said they're like virginal professors of anatomy in that they've read all the books, but they've never been there. And I think there's a fair amount of that with particularly this populist stuff. It's just meant to appeal to the more base instincts of people, pointing fingers of blame and saying, well, everything would be fine if you did away with big businessmen. Really? Well, if you did away with big business, who would employ everybody?
Final word, Bill.
Let me pick up on that if I could. Business provides capitalism is the greatest economic engine we've ever seen. Capitalism is providing the wealth to fund government, to fund nonprofits, to fund philanthropy. And we're biting the hand that feeds us. Unfortunately, everyone running for office has got on this populist kick. And I think business is going to be faced, whomever is elected, and we're going to have a rough year, is going to have to get out and assert what great things it's doing. And the issue we have is we have global companies operating with local tax jurisdictions. And so Ford was criticized for putting the focus in Mexico, Ford Focus, that is. At the same time, they're adding a lot of big car production in Detroit. And I think that's a very rational decision that Mark Fields and the Ford team has made, yet they were severely criticized. So global companies have to stay competitive. And the strength of America is having great global companies that can be competitive on the world front, not just in the U.S., and being able to export all over the world and compete
we gotta
all
wrap
over the
it.
world.
We got to
That's
keep
what's
it there.
made America great, I think, and allowed us to employ a lot of very high talented people.
Guys, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Bill George and Wilbur Ross.